and how these wounds tend to dominate people's lives. That something happens somewhere along the way. It could be in childhood, it could be later. But for many of us, these are unhealing, constantly reinforcing wounds that, in a sense, make life unhappy and difficult. And whenever I speak to people privately, of course I always hear about the wounds, and for some people they're really pretty profound. Real betrayals, if you will, by life circumstance or parents or siblings or friends. And the knots and the densities that are woven around the wound in order to keep it from festering all the time, from causing us constant suffering, are a huge part of what becomes the blockage for people in life. Stay away from that pain. Do not go near the wound. And so there's a huge amount of avoidance, which ultimately doesn't work, because wounds have a way of making themselves known. What's interesting to me is how built into the human condition they are. How we come into the world and wait for the wound that's going to dominate our lives. And often, you don't have to wait long. It can come very early. And I really am watching my grandchildren as they unfold. And I really see how pernicious the ego-mindedness is, how determined it is to take control of all of this. And I don't mean to make it a complete negative, because it appears to be negative only because it so gets in the way of the absolute purity that appears in the beginning. And it's not sustained for long, but it's there, and you can feel it in children. There's a beauty of being, a simplicity of being, a kind of openness, a kind of reveling in the power of discovery, the power of seeing and touching and feeling the world. And it's so beautiful to watch, and it's so painful to watch as it starts to close down. And it does close down. And it closes down in every one of us. And then there seems to be this process of trying to reopen our closed nature, to rediscover our simple purity of being. And that may be the entire idea of a life journey, to recapture the simplicity and the truth that we knew as babies. And I know this is a very simple idea and certainly not a new one. But as you really watch it happening, it's kind of remarkable, because you really do sense how much manifested reality manipulates and maneuvers us into conforming to the demands of time and space. We really become servants of this world that we're in. And there's no way not to do that. There's no way to become someone who is consciously bigger than and on top of those demands. Very few people ever pull that off. The world is very prescriptive. It tells us, in a certain sense, from early on, this is what you are, this is how you behave, this is how you function, this is how you become contained and important to the service of life. They give you rules, they give you various demands, some of them reasonable, some of them unreasonable in terms of your own sensibilities. But mostly, all of this creates discomfort, struggle, stress, sadness, dissatisfaction. And it's really incredible to watch it in a 4-year-old, and also in a barely 1-year-old, because its forces are already happening, and these children are becoming us. They're becoming what we became. Each one of us have grown through that process, and it's pretty much invisible to us as we grow up, because there's no way to see it happening. There's no way to know what's going on. And we have parents who we hope will protect us on some level from all this, but they were never protected, and they don't know either. Nobody really knows how to go through this. Parents are well-intentioned. I know they are. I was, I think, a well-intentioned parent, and I'm a well-intentioned grandparent, but I can still see certain things that I say my granddaughter will listen to and then suddenly become teary-eyed. And I tried to talk to her about growing up the other day, about how things are going to change and how she will have girlfriends and boyfriends who will be more important than her grandpa or her grandma, and how we won't have the same relationship. And she started sobbing. Just sobbing that she doesn't want to have anybody more important than grandpa or grandma. She just wants this forever and ever and ever. That's what she says, forever and ever and ever. And if you ever tell her something will be taken away, she says, forever and ever and ever. And she goes on and on and on, and then she's just more sobbing. And I had no intention of wounding her by saying any of this. I was just trying to create a kind of a picture of how things will unfold. But she doesn't want a picture of how things are going to unfold. She doesn't need to know that. She's going to find it out as she goes. And so in all of my sort of idea of being conscious and being helpful and being prescriptive, I really caused pain. And she got over it because we hug a lot, and there's a lot of discussion, and there's a lot of understanding that comes. And in no sense do I fault myself, because I'm operating from very, very real high intention or good intention, as do we all. But suddenly there's a building block inside that's like structured into impermanence. There's a sense of I won't have something forever. And I remember my mother doing that to me when I was a little boy. She told me, I think I've told you this before, but dying is going to sleep and never waking up. And I think she wanted me to have that as a kind of comfort. But it was horrible. It was the worst thing ever. It was like, I'll never wake up, ever, ever, ever. And this idea of forever started to promulgate itself into something vast. And all I could think of was, I would never smell coffee in the morning. And I couldn't bear the idea of never smelling coffee in the morning. And I kind of credit her saying that, and that idea of forever moving its way into my brain with the beginning of a spiritual journey. Because I had to begin to understand, what could it mean, forever? What is that about? What is infinity? What is eternity? What is an eternal truth? What is all of that? It all started to come in through that practice. So that was, in a sense, a kind of wound. Not the kind of wounds that a lot of people have, because a lot of people's wounds are much more potent. Loss, terrible, terrible loss, that happens to people, and fear, and rejection, and not being as beautiful as somebody else is, or not being as athletic as somebody else is. I mean, that for me was a terrible wound that I couldn't ever throw a ball more than 20 feet. You know, I'd never had the musculature or whatever it is that would do that. And I suffered my whole childhood not being an athlete. And finally realized you don't have to be an athlete. It doesn't matter. You can be whatever you want to be. But it took me a long time to kind of get into that, wanting to be one of the group, to measure up to what you begin to feel as peer pressure. It's really hard. Life is such a hard journey in that regard, and we are programmed for hardness. We're programmed to experience that. It's not like it's a mistake or somebody could do something or give you a word or a pill or a blessing or something and get that to go away. If anything, what you start to discover is the blessing is that it happens. Because it's only through that that life begins to demand of you and the work of living starts to happen. The work of moving through manifested truth starts to take place. And it takes place because you want to adjust this to a more perfect state. You want to get into something that is sweeter, more loving, more beautiful. You want to live happily ever after. We're programmed to try to live happily ever after. And of course, nobody does live happily ever after in the traditional fairy tale sense. On the other hand, it's really put into us early on, at least in Western culture, that living happily ever after is possible. Usually it has to do with, you know, finding the person you're going to love. Finding, you know, having a lot of money, you know, the beanstalk, you know, I mean, I just saw Into the Woods the other day, so clearly that's playing into what I am saying here. But all these fantasies that are not real, and our lives are based on these extraordinary ideas that we can have something that's other than what we have. And so we make this effort and we make this search, and in the process of doing that, we build a life. We build a life that is well-directed or misdirected, that creates something stable or something unstable. But every one of us builds something in order to survive. And in that regard, we're all consumers, we're all students of life, we're all part of the equilibrium of the world, every one of us. And very few of us understand that. In our imperfections, we feel like somehow we are betraying the possibility of life, when in fact we are absolutely feeding into what life wants and needs of us. And it's only in finally beginning to understand that the wound is a gift, that the wound being focused upon, that the wound being embraced, and finally saying yes to your insufficiency, yes to the fact that you don't measure up, yes to the fact that there's a million things beyond you that you'll never get to. Finding all of this coming into play and going yes to it, rather than being angry, being hostile, being depressed, being frustrated, being, hating other people for doing it to you. You know, I mean, that's a big part of what goes on in woundedness, the blaming of others. All of this stuff goes on in life, and it keeps us really entrapped. And so when I teach this practice to people and give you an opportunity to do something like take a very deep breath, hold it for 10 seconds, and ask inside for help to surrender. What are you surrendering? You're surrendering your attachment to the wound, your attachment to the stuff that locks you in, that keeps you unable to move forward in life. It begins to break down the tension that is grasping the stuff that kills you, the toxicity of your life that's so familiar you think it's your lifeblood. You don't have to live that way. It's not required. So you take a breath and you feel this thing starting to break down and break down. It's really the gift of Rudy's teaching, this thing that starts to fall away, and you finally let it go. You can even do the negative psychic tension release exercise, asking for help to surrender negative psychic tension and letting this way deep, painful energy move out of your body, onto your arms, into your hands, and then into the atmosphere, and you shake it out. It's a release, it's a freeing of your stuff so that you can start to not be caught by the dynamic of woundedness. And yet I teach so many people the possibility of this, and they don't want to do it. They don't want to do it. They fight. They fight to support the wound. They fight to say, but I had this problem, and I had this, and this was done to me, and these horrible things happened. I cannot get rid of that. Basically, which means I will not be myself. I will not give up my comfort zone of misery. I will not do that. I won't do it because I want to hold on to my identity, and my identity is a wounded person. And it's so hard for me as a teacher to know that that identity is only your ego mind. It's only this small part of who you are. It's a small part of who all of us are. We all believe we are this person with this name and this body type and this particular look. And even though this thing is changing all the time and getting older and not working quite as well and getting diseased and all these other things, we fight to hold on to this persona, this identity. And the whole idea of asking for help to surrender is to let go of that hold and finding that there's something else there. There's something else that is spacious, open, loving, simple, kind, allowing, forgiving. There's this other thing, and it's right there. And all of this ego-minded, knotted, wounded stuff is all playing out within that. And so if you're lucky, Nancy was describing to me as she came to class this morning, having all of these problems, and not having enough money to go over the bridge because she forgot the money, and suddenly the car was going on empty, and I mean all these obstructions to getting here, which is, if one thing I've discovered is people who come to meditation often find their woundedness becoming really front and center. It's just the reason not to be here is much stronger than the reason to be here. But if you take a breath, which is what she described to me, she took a breath and just felt she could see this stuff rather than be in it. And she just saw it, and everything worked out. Got here on time. We had time for a wonderful discussion before class started, and everything worked. If you can see the wound as within a larger space, if you can see the wounded mind is ego mind and not who you are the space in which all of this is occurring. It's really hard to get people to that place, because every person who tries to get to an awareness of oneness always does it through the prism of the ego. And so when you think of yourself as oneness, you stretch the ego to embrace all that. And what happens is the opposite. The ego goes, and everything else that's left is what you are, which is everything. Everything. And the ego can't contain it. It just gets pained by trying to. The ego is not separate from this at all. The ego is a tiny little particle in the vastness of being. And the fact that you are so focused on that ego and so focused on its pain and suffering is essential to the making of the world. So there's nothing wrong with any of this. But it finally squeezes you into something that says, help me. This is too hard. What am I? Who am I? Why am I here? All these questions start to come up, and they're really vital questions. And you start to become aware in the dynamic of that you can't figure it out, that you need help to do this. And what is that help? Well, you start to discover philosophy, you start to discover theology, you start to discover all these different sources that offer help, or even just a section in the bookstore that says help. And then you go and you start to figure things out. You start to figure things out, and you start to make this journey, all of which mostly is to fix the ego, which doesn't work. I mean, it does temporarily. You develop a really strong willpower. I will lose 50 pounds. I will build a massive muscle. I will go to meditation. Whatever the thing is, you create this will to do this stuff, and you just build the ego into more and more of a potent force, which now has power because it can affect the world with its will. It's very good at that. And so you create more difficulty, then release yourself from difficulty. But it's all, again, part of the system. And what keeps happening, in my experience, is that you finally get to a place of complete and utter failure. Absolute failure. One, you can't figure it out. Two, you don't know what to do. Two, you're in pain and you can't release it. Nothing works. Absolutely nothing works. That's the doorway. That's the doorway to yourself. Because then when you say, please help me, you mean it. When you say, please help me to surrender, something can happen. You let go of this striving little thing, and you discover that that little thing is a speck in the vastness of who you are. The discovery of the self is not about ownership. It's not about having anything, because there's no one there to have it. It's about being everything. And what do you do when you discover you are everything? Not everything in the sense of I am the all-powerful, the almighty, because that's an identity. It's just an awareness of being, and it starts to expand. You're the floor, you're the glass windows, you're the walls, you're the sky, you're the planets, you're the universe, the galaxies, and what is that? What is that? And that's still the manifested form. That's the concretized version of what you are. What happens when you really, really surrender? All of that starts to break up. It loses solidity. What you are is no longer matter. What you are is something that precedes matter. This unmanifested being. And that unmanifested being is what you are every second. Well, in fact, I say second, but it's outside of time and space. Time and space starts to form within it. And you keep going on and on and on. And the knowing that occurs is not understanding, it's awareness. You are aware of your being. You are aware of being. And you are aware of the miracle of being. The fact that there is anything at all. And then all of that starts to radiate down into this little wounded being, which is still wounded, by the way. But you look at that wound in a totally different way. That wound keeps you here. It keeps you part of the world. It keeps you functioning, and it makes you unbelievably compassionate to everybody else who's wounded. You can feel the wound. You can actually help heal the wound, not by actually making it go away, but by giving people a taste of this, of surrender, of openness, of the universe that exists before existence, before the Big Bang, they said. You just give a taste. You give the possibility of that. And by giving that possibility, people start to breathe differently. They start to look at their life differently. They start to look at the wound differently. They start to see themselves as something larger, not necessarily universal, but just 10 feet bigger than their body. And they see the dramas inside, the emotional life, all of that stuff in perspective. And that perspective allows them not to engage it as though it is the worst thing that could possibly happen to a human being. Because it's the one thing that gets you to grow. It's the one thing that gets you to ask for help. It's the one thing that tells you, don't settle in here because this is not going to last. It's this thing that speaks to you, the wound that awakens you. The wound is the gift. But some people only lock into the wound, and they live in the wound for their whole life, and my guess is many lifetimes. And the wound only compounds and creates karmic forces that make it more difficult to get free of, because a lot of us need a lot of pain before we finally ask for help. More than we can possibly imagine. We endure. I saw 2 movies this weekend so far, because I have to nominate for the Oscars in the Writers Guild tomorrow. And so I'm watching movies, and they're so depressing, mostly. So I watched this movie Unbroken, and I watched a movie last night called American Sniper. And they're only about people overcoming horrible, horrible circumstance. The worst imaginable circumstance. And they have no point of view beyond that. And it's too bad, because they could be great movies, but they miss greatness because most people don't understand the bigger journey, and so the idea of just overcoming these, or surviving, let's say, these horrible circumstances seems to be enough. And it's not enough. If you don't use this stuff for transcendence, for reaching, for praying, for hoping for something bigger, for sitting down and meditating and attending some kind of program that will start to help you in some way. Again, most programs are only going to help your ego feel better, which is even okay, except the problem is once your ego feels better, your journey gets co-opted. It's not about just feeling better, because then you've just lessened the impulse to do this work, to reach. So, if you're starting to feel like you're getting there, it just means you're going to take a while now to finally get back to the wound, and then let that do its work. And I apologize for that on some level, but it's really how it works. But the great thing is we're all going to hurt enough at some point to find our way there, to find our way home. It's the thing that pushes us. And it's built in because of impermanence. It's built in because life doesn't satisfy, because life doesn't take you there. It doesn't do it by itself, but it's very geared to that. So ultimately the worst suffering, you either triumph over it or you use it as a way to get somewhere else. By somewhere else, I must say, I mean right here. Because the only place you can ever get to, and I talk about this a lot, the only place you can ever get to is where you are. And if you discover where you are, is not rooted in the mundane, it's not rooted in the manifested forces that you're caught in. It's right here is everywhere. Right here is infinite, eternal space. It's beyond time. It's beyond form. It's just right here. And when you start to really meditate and really work, and you start to break yourself down, and when you finally awaken to any of this, when you just awaken to it, you realize you're this. You are this, and you speak this. You speak it to anybody who will listen. It just comes out. Poor Nancy walked in the door, it was coming right out. There's no way to contain it, really. It just wants to speak itself all the time. And there's no way not to let it do that. I mean, you can go to a cocktail party and talk about other things, but it is so potent in itself. It so wants the amazing clarity and truth of being to find its way into this space, that's all it will do. And it's all any of us will do when that time comes. You will just become voices for, channels for, whatever you want to call it, for the self, or as I tried to describe it last week in my talk, the source. Source is endlessly pouring through, and it's pouring through either consciously or unconsciously, but when you tap into it, when it finally begins to become an awareness, when you start to live in connection to the source, when you realize you are the source, you have an ownership. You have the right to speak it. You have more than the right. That's why you're here. You are the very vehicle through which it finds its expression in the world, at least in terms of the philosophical points of view. There's nothing that's not expressing it. The flowers, this screen, every one of you, each of you are an expression of this thing, but to be it consciously, to know this as truth, that's an amazing possibility in human life. It is beyond belief. And the whole goal of coming here is to try with every ounce of energy to get there and fail. And then it will happen. Because you can't get there. Sorry, guys. You will not be there when you get there. You will be there, but the part of you that is really you will be there. The part of you that's temporal, ego-mind consciousness will no longer be part of the game. Actually, it will be. It'll be a very small speck in the game. The image that the great Hindu teachings use is like a flame, or a more common nowadays light bulb in the face of the sun. You know, you turn a light bulb on in the sun, it's like, you know, it doesn't, but there it is. And most of us we're like light bulbs when there's no sun, but when the sun comes out, you go, oh, and you're just the light. You're the light itself, and all of us are that. Every one of us is that, and the whole goal of every spiritual teacher is to make people aware of that. But how do you do it? You know, everybody tries to figure out their way to teach people through homilies and parables and, you know, long talks like this, and you know, energy work. You know, Rudy was really good with energy work, which is a wonderful gift because it breaks stuff down and breaks down a lot of the wounded sort of crust. It really helps you get closer and closer to the self. And finally you just go, okay, enough of that wound, enough of the suffering, enough of the sadness, enough of the depression, enough of all the stuff that's in the way. Just, I'm going to let it go. And you do. Or actually, you don't let it go. Your own higher self, your source, trusts you. It knows because of the commitment you've made to this process that you mean it. And its gift to you, parental gift, because that's what it's like, is to remove the suffering, or to remove the separateness that causes the suffering. Suffering doesn't go anywhere, really, but it kind of is like, there it is, like everything else. But this source loves you. It just loves you. Hard to believe it, but it allows you your journey, but it never disappears from your life. It never isn't present and available. It's just paying attention, getting quiet enough to be aware of it. That's what meditation is for. Just quiet enough to go, oh. There it is. There all the time. It's a guiding force. It really knows what to do. It understands how to move in one direction or another. It's kind of the GPS. That's why GPSs feel so good, by the way. As you're driving down the street and the voice says, in 500 yards, turn left, and then it says, and then to make a right, and then it says, make a U-turn. You know, I mean, there's something so wonderful about this thing guiding you from outer space. That's exactly what the self feels like. It's guiding you from somewhere, and it knows just what to do. It says, do this. And then you say, nah, it's guiding me the wrong way, I'll go this way. And then it will keep saying to you, you're going the wrong way, or whatever it says to you, turn back, make a U-turn, do these things, and either you do or you don't, you know. And sometimes it appears to be wrong, but this one is not wrong. It's not wrong. You just follow it, and it brings you to where you need to go. It's not always, you don't always get there in half an hour. It's a lifetime of finding your way. And then my experience now is that it just keeps getting bigger and deeper. I mean, I don't know how to describe this, because I thought there was a finality to it, but there is no finality. It just becomes more and more. There's more presence than you can possibly imagine. And it's almost like you have to have, as Rudy would put it, the muscle system to withstand it. It's such profound awareness. And it just goes on, and you just know that you're this. And it's beyond extraordinary. It's everything we're looking for. It's not exactly supernatural, but it is the equivalent of that. And you're not special to have it. You're just, that's what we're all meant to have. Every one of us. Nobody is going to become more special than anybody else. And if you walk around thinking you're special, you're just recreating the ego that created the problem in the first place. Because you'll never feel special. You'll just feel grateful. And all you want to do is help people get there. That's all you want. So, anyway, whoever's listening to this talk, you know, that's what this talk was for. Helping you arrive at where you are. Whenever you hear this in next week or in 10 years or whatever, you're only going to arrive at the same place, where you are. You know, there's no future in this. There's only present. Just present. So, don't get angry at your wounds. Don't think you're special in your suffering. Don't think that the universe dealt you alone a bad set of cards. People who look like they have a good set of cards still have their bad set somewhere. They got to play. They got to play things that they don't in their hands that they don't want. We all do. That's the way it works. So feel the suffering of other people. Hug them a lot. Be available to others in any small way or big way. And you will feel when you do that, you know, the way people who work for charities or people who work on bread lines or food lines, you know, they feel good. Why do they feel good? Because the self is at work. Any questions?
There is one. You said we come here to show up to fail, and that sense of surrender being not so much an act of will, but something that is more grace happening in our lives.
Let me put it this way, because we don't come here to fail, really. But the ego mind is a temporary construct, and it's not built to last, and that its impermanence is a source of great suffering for people. It has disease. It has things that are literally attacking it. There's life that's trying to destroy it. It's not a comfortable environment, you know, and yet it's part of the construct. Why is it like that? I mean, that's something philosophers talk about. I can't give you the answer, but I will tell you that even though we're given this very awful kind of construct on one level, it's the doorway to, you might call, paradise. And
so energetically, when we get closer to that doorway, do things start getting more ratcheted up in a sense that, like you said, that things start intensifying, the things start falling apart?
Well, I'll tell you, just biologically speaking,
yeah,
that's yes. Biologically speaking, things are going to fall apart. You know, either slowly or rapidly. You know, there's going to come a point of absolute annihilation, and it's really not fun for anybody, ego or not ego. There's a biological horror that's going to occur for everybody, whether it happens in a millisecond or whether it happens over the course of several years. We are going to become less and less and less, and some people will feel very betrayed by that, because it's like nobody ever told them that it would happen. You know, it's like we're told it from day one. You know, I told Talia the other day. You know, it's going to come a point where I'm not going to be the person you're going to turn to for love, and she started crying. But we're told it early on, and yes, it's true. We're going to ultimately have to ratchet it up, in your terms, in order to finally get free. But the great thing about spiritual teaching is that this freedom is possible now. You don't have to wait to that final millisecond. And in fact, most people in that final millisecond can't pull it off, because they haven't prepared on any level for the awareness that's about to come. And that awareness will be seen as something unfriendly. That big an awareness is like, what? It so diminishes you. It's so vast, and you don't see it as your own self. You tend, because you're in dualistic mode, to see it as other, which could be God. You can call it God, or you can call it devil. I mean, if you're frightened of it, it's pretty terrifying. There's a lot of stuff that comes through when you finally get exposed to the self. So this journey of awakening, of slowly, doing the work, building the system that can open and open and open and open, and then when you finally cease to be your own separate self, it's only it's a release, it's a liberation, it's a joy. But you have to ratchet it up yourself. That's kind of what Rudy would talk about. You do the work. You bring yourself to that place. Don't keep sitting there caught up in the wound. Don't keep blaming other people. Don't keep getting angry at life for not giving you what it wants. It's giving you everything. It's not about the job. It's not about the paycheck. It's not about the relationship. It's about being and finally getting that. But why is it so hard? I have students I love so much who haven't gotten the thing they want. And that not getting it is the reason they don't get this. Because they think there's a ticket or something you have to have in order to get there. And maybe they're right. I cannot tell you exactly. I mean, I was given a particular path in this lifetime in which I got pretty much everything I wanted, which is an amazing experience. But the thing that I realized is that all the material stuff didn't do it. And of course, I can tell you that, but everybody goes, yeah, but. You've had it, so you don't really know. Well, I can say I do know, but it doesn't register because you didn't get your ticket through. You didn't get your, whatever you're looking for, the Oscar, the Super Bowl ring, or whatever the thing is you think you need in life, the $1 million paycheck or the $100 million paycheck or now the $1 billion paycheck. You think you can't go there until you get that thing. And that keeps you in the game, but it keeps you blind and miserable. And all I can say is, trust me, none of that's important. The important stuff, which I learned by becoming a grandpa, is the simplest stuff in the world. All of my achievements in a material sense, in a career sense, are no longer reference points for me. They don't register. They don't mean anything. I don't even like to talk about that stuff. I had a very big career. Great. It gave me a comfortable life. I'm very grateful for that. But I know people living in much simpler circumstances who are incredibly happy people. They didn't have to get bigger and bigger and better and better. It doesn't have to be like that. So suffering will be there, and ego-minded conflict will be there no matter how big or how small your life is. Your job is to confront it, let it become the linchpin of your search. It will keep pushing you. And as it becomes more ratcheted up, it'll push harder and harder. At some point, and I think for many people, the final moment of life is the awakening, in a good sense. And for some people, the final moment of life digs you deeper into the hole. It's kind of where you're at. And I often tell people, do you say yes or no at that point? Do you go, I mean, the Tibetans have it down pretty well. They say the clear light of reality appears, and either you enter it or you don't. They also say it lasts that long. So you don't have a lot of time to think about it. You either go, yes, and prepare for that. Mahatma Gandhi in the movie anyway, and maybe this is true, when he dies, when he's being shot, and he sees the guy aiming the gun at him at his assassination, he goes, Shiva Om, Shiva Om. In other words, he said, this is God. This too is God. That's what you want. How many people pull that off? I don't know. But there's a lot of possibility to practice. You guys are all sitting here in this room with an enormous amount of awareness of what I'm talking about. That's an amazing gift. It's an amazing gift because this is not going to be a blind spot for you. You'll know, and you really do have the opportunity to get past the wound and to use the wound to open you up to this amazing compassion for being.
Might be that wherever that craving or that sense of lack is pointing back to where the wound has taken over
Absolutely.
the images to So I guess because I feel really kind of stuck right now in some old program around that, right? Thinking that if I have that relation, or that person was that way,
Yep.
then it would all be good, like, you know,
Yes.
look at Bruce, he's got that. You know, so it's like I really see that in my inner, you know, I see how that has caught me.
You have no idea how similar that is to almost everyone I talk to.
Yeah.
They are caught by that. If that one thing would happen, then they could surrender. They could let go. You know, it's so pervasive. It's so everywhere.
And it's so visceral, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like struggling up against that to go. Okay, guess what? That's not important.
Right.
Then it catches you again.
Absolutely.
And it takes you that way. And then it's like,
we need a 12-step program for that kind of addiction.
Absolutely. So,
That's the
it
problem.
is addiction.
Yes, it's addiction
It's
to
addiction.
the hope that the one thing you're
society-
waiting for will come and take care of you.
Yeah.
You should
Based
start a
fairy
course on this.
tales. What's
Truly.
that?
You know, she's wonderful with 12-step programs and has truly flowered as a result. I have many friends who are in
Yeah.
12-step programs, and I get it, because
Yeah.
you know, we're all devoted to the wrong idea. We're all thinking this thing is going to help us, and it won't. And what can you do? I mean, this is one approach, and yet, you know, here it's so available, and people, you know, I imagine people waking up on Sunday morning saying, "Do I really want to go? Do I really want to listen to him again? He's going to talk for an hour. He's going to sit through that long class." You know, I get it. I mean, I really get it. I would do the same thing probably, except that there's something trying to be expressed in all of this that's meaningful, and I wish it would happen and get across. And you don't have to come, because God knows there's a million of these on the web now, and you can listen to these talks or other people, because there's a lot of people saying what I'm saying. But listen to somebody and do what you're describing. Stop being caught up in the one thing that's going to finally trip the button. If you get this thing, it will get you there. The trick is, if you can accept the imperfection of what is there right now, just accept it, that will do it. Just accept what is. Truly, truly. And you will feel all this stuff grinding inside you. It's so hard, it's so sad, it's so wants not to be that way. You want to have those things that you want. I mean, I totally get it. But lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, they structure a lifetime, or you do, to get it, and then you finally get it, and it still didn't work. And that's really the magic of the universe, that it moves time and space to finally give you what you want, and then you fail again. And then you go, and then you try to create the next thing that will do it. You know? What's the next thing? And the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and you never get there. And finally, I don't know how or when it takes place, you go, there's nothing that will do it. Nothing. And you finally let go, and you realize that was exactly what you were looking for. Because you're not your own drama, you're everybody's drama. And you're not even that, because you're the thing in which that drama is contained. You are this vastness of being in which everybody is suffering. And you can help them by loving them, by expressing your incompletion, by talking about your pain and your frustration and your freedom from that, because you realize who you are. That's the real spiritual journey. And it's amazing. Okay. Sorry, everybody. I know this is a long talk.